Welcome. Hello, my name is Kim Searle, Emotional Mastery. Thank you very much for joining us for this, the part 2 interview with Danny Reid. You may recall we had our first interview last week, and for those of you who missed it, I will put the link for that in the comments below so you can check it out. Danny Reid is working currently as a hosting solutions manager in a large organisation, and he was talking about his early years as a carer for his mum, and then how he went into his other jobs for looking after patients with dementia and then schizophrenia before moving on to teaching other young adults of his own age. So this week, I want to move on to talk more about something we alluded to in the last video, but not covered in great detail, around ADHD and autism. So that's the theme of today's video. So welcome back, Danny. Thank you so much for giving us some more of your very valuable time.
Very good, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously last week we talked more about your early years history and how you got to do some of the work that you were doing. But one of the things that you alluded to last week, and I want to take on a bit more, is this autism and ADHD that you were finally diagnosed with last year. Now, I know that I am not as up to speed as perhaps I could be on this side of things. So could you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, I'd like to give it a little bit of context. And as mentioned previously in the last video, I was diagnosed with depression and IBS at 14. I personally think part of that was down to the genetic transfer of depression from obviously a parent to a child. So it was almost an easy win in my view nowadays. Throughout that, I did the various jobs that I did, and then I ended up going into other areas with sales and doing whatever I could basically do before I came to obviously the technology arena. I accepted the diagnosis for a long period of time. I spent the bulk of my life up into my early 30s fighting the need to have medication after seeing my mum be on so many meds. Yeah. And the negatives that they created, obviously where she would have the extra drug to be able to counteract the symptom of the previous drug, I was very, very much against them. I came to a point where I couldn't function. I literally couldn't function. And it was like, yeah, time to go back to the docs. Went to the docs, popped me on the current primary depression drug at the time. And yeah, I went with the flow. Saw immediate benefits, which was a godsend.
Yes.
And went from there. So although most people wouldn't believe it, and I used this pun last time, so hopefully they won't start throwing tomatoes at me. You wouldn't believe, yeah, I'm 44. I know it's hard to believe. So after accepting the depression diagnosis and anxiety diagnosis for 10 years more, the back end of last year, I just felt that it wasn't just that. Having lived with my mum, who's a manic depressive, having worked in that particular arena in the care environment, got a pretty good understanding of exactly what depression is, what its triggers are, what the effects are, symptoms, and how to counter them, and so on and so forth. And it just wasn't right. And frustratingly, considering for me it was an epiphany, it was a eureka moment, I stumbled across a list of symptoms for ADHD.
Oh, right.
And as I was reading them, they just resonated. And I was like, wow, hold on. And I was aware previously that, ADHD, autism can be misdiagnosed. One of the diagnoses is a classic, is depression.
I didn't know that, but that's interesting because I see clients with depression, so that's interesting.
Well, the thing is, it's depression is one of the symptoms of ADHD and autism. It's the opposite. So you kind of scratch the surface and you say, oh yeah, this person's showing classic symptoms of depression. They've got no motivation, They're always tired. They don't enjoy things. No appetite. All the classic stuff. And then you kind of get to the point where, but I'm also very forgetful. And, if I go out and do a bit of gardening, I can guarantee within half an hour to an hour, I'll have cut my finger, whether it be on the job that I'm doing or one of the tools I'm using. Focus, easily distracted. Doing a bit, I've spent the way I've tried to understand it is, I'm a great starter, but I'm not a good finisher. I noticed in the corporate world that was an acceptable trait to have. So I was like, cool, I'll go with that then.
Yes.
And that was fine, Wouldn't shout about it, because obviously if you want to get a job, you can't say, yeah, I'm brilliant at starting stuff, but I never finish anything, because that would just be a no-no, obviously.
Yes.
But it was easy to relate to that. And then as I started digging more into the ADHD side, it became more and more relevant that, somebody with high functioning ADHD will start a project, love it. It will be the most important thing in their life. They'll go, perfect, I can do this. We've got this. It will then move on to, okay, that's not working. We haven't got this. And then it will be, I'm a failure. I can't do it. And it's a slippery slope every time. And if any of my old colleagues do watch this, they will fully understand what I'm about to say. I started an estate audit 3 years ago, never finished it. Did loads of work, got loads of resolutions, and fixed naming conventions, fixed where devices were missing, where they were misaligned, where they were misunderstood, they weren't in the right estate, or they didn't have the correct service against them. I probably did the audit, but in my mind, because I hadn't followed all of the steps for the audit, I never completed it. Right. So I did a huge amount of work, and I made sure that anywhere there should be a red circle, there was a red circle. Anywhere there's a green circle. But I never quite got to the point where I was sorting out the purple circles and the orange circles that were that level underneath, that layer underneath. So for me, it was, I promised multiple bosses I would get this audit done, and it was the most important thing we had to do. My role in itself is sort of a caretaker role. So if you don't know your own estate, what chance have you got?
Yeah. Can I just caveat that a little bit, because obviously you and I were working in a similar environment, is that the business also drives you to move forward. So you are given this project to work, and you do go, for want of a better way, hell for leather, because you've got to get this done, and it's very exciting to get it done. But other things suddenly come in to sideline you and swipe you, and you don't always get the opportunity to finish what you've started. So I just wanted to caveat that, so that there's some element to how you view it, because I don't know what these purple circles or the other circles are, but there may have been some of that going on as well. So it's not in
lower layers. It's lower layers, and you start a project. And I think the point that you've made is quite relevant, in the sense that you'll get an email in from a customer. Now, if that email comes directly to you from the customer, it doesn't matter what your boss has asked you to do. It doesn't matter what you've got going on internally in the business. The customer is always right. And my role was very customer facing.
Yes.
So the customer says to me, Danny, I need this information. Danny, can you sort this out? Can you do this? Can you do that? You've got to do it. And when you speak to your manager, you say, it's coming from the customer, and your manager doesn't even question it. You had a deadline to finish it last week, but I had these 3 queries come from the customer, so I've been waylaid. And I think that's the point. You get those emails in. You come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you've got like 3 new emails with 3 new queries. And it's easy to think, right, I need to get these done. They're easy wins. I'll do them. And before you know it, you're on Friday, and you still haven't even looked at the piece of work you were going to start last Monday.
So that ties in nicely back to what you were saying to me before we started this interview, when we were talking about how you recognised you had a problem, was that you had to be reminded to do something, or it was very easy to forget as well. So you're very much focused on what was in front of you almost. Is that
Easily
right?
distracted.
Mm.
Well, what one of the primary ADHD symptoms is easily distracted. And that's not, you suddenly notice that EastEnders is on, oh, I'm going to watch that, and you suddenly get drawn into it. It's another query comes in, and you think, I need to do that first. And you commit to a timeline, a deadline, and then because it's your boss, you miss it. If it's a customer, you've got to complete it. There's no two ways about it. So you kind of like in your mind, you try and get the other bits done first. The other one that's a big one, and again, very important, and I've had many situations in my lifetime that have presented this particular symptom, and it's impulsivity. So a very, I'm going to go there, a very detrimental part of the behaviour and the symptoms of ADHD is the impulsivity.
Right.
It can have positives, but more often than not, the negatives can kind of like outweigh them, unfortunately. I'll share a positive story where the impulsivity was a good thing, in that with the family, we had a dog. It was a rescue dog. I got talked into it over a period of 5 years. There's a story in that in itself, but maybe if anyone wants to hear that, we'll go for a pint.
Yeah.
Basically, we got the dog. We had it for 6 months. Whenever I would walk it, if we saw another dog and it got the chance to play, it was just like watching a kid with a brand new toy. I loved it. So one morning we were doing some jobs around the house, and the job was we needed to clear the conservatory. We'd done what everybody does. It'd become a dumping ground, and we couldn't use the room. It was just a shame. So we started going through the conservatory. We did about an hour and a half. I got bored, got distracted, and so I turned around to my partner and said, "Hey, let's just pop over to Colton and just see if they've got any rescue dogs." 2 hours later, we came home with the second rescue dog. So my dog had got a friend. We bought a bed on the way. We had to get a bowl for food, and we had nowhere to put her. So I had to come home, take apart the original dog crate, and create 2 crates so that the dogs would have beds. I did that by getting some wood from the shed, and I built this bunk bed of crates for the dogs, because I had to do it by the time bedtime came, otherwise they wouldn't have a bed to go to. And we wanted the dogs to be crate trained, so there was no choice. But that was it. It was just like, and my partner would recollect the story, and just like it was random. It was like 1 minute we're cleaning the conservatory and making sure we've got that clear so we can use it at the weekend. Then we got another dog.
Yes.
As I say, good story, because it was another rescue dog. So,
but a big impact as well, because obviously you had to go and buy the bed and then remake the crate and all this before. Just for those of people who are watching, did the conservatory get tidied?
Okay. Look at
that
cloud.
There's a pig flying. Fabulous. So okay, so obviously, you said you went back to the doctors and said, look, this ADHD really resonated for you. What happened next then for you? Because obviously at this moment you knew that the depression wasn't. It was a diagnosis, but for you it wasn't the right one. How did you get further? Because you actually ended up doing 2 tests, didn't you? So yeah, just tell us a little bit more there.
I went to the doctor, requested the referral. It didn't go anywhere. As people who are part of large companies will be aware, we had a scheme where we could have a yearly health check, where you would go in and they'd check out all of your physical health, and also your mental health. During that session, the consultant that I spoke to, I raised the query to say, I'm preoccupied about this possible diagnosis, but I'm also conscious that being a mature adult, I won't get anywhere with it. Obviously I'm aware that you've got to pick it up when you're a kid. If it wasn't prevalent when you were a kid, then it's not there.
Yeah.
This consultant turned around to me and said, well, no, not at all, Mr. Reid. I had somebody 2 weeks ago who exhibited similar behaviour, requested the same research and investigation. And a week later, they were diagnosed with autism. And I was like, Wow, really? So
Wow.
there's an option for me. It's not a closed door. He gave me a referral so that I could use it within the business insurance or the health insurance. Phone the health insurance, not covered. Doesn't do mental health. Cool. So I let it slide for a couple of months. That was in July. And then around October, November, I was like, I've got to do something. So I went back to the doctor, asked for the referral. The doctor said, yeah, you sure you need it? You sure you know? I was like, yeah, it's happening. I don't care if you can see it. I don't care if you understand where I'm coming from. I want the referral. I want to go and see someone. So that was the initial visit. I got a letter through a couple of weeks later from the mental health team, as it were. The waiting time was a year.
That's one of the drawbacks, isn't it? Yes. I mean, I know people who are wanting to seek counsellors through the doctors can wait 8-9 months
What's
on
the
average.
point? By the time you get to that stage, it's all over. But yeah, so that came up, and that was when my my tenacity came out. So I waited again another 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Had a really bad stint where I wasn't functioning correctly. So I started phoning the mental health team that I needed to speak to. Made the initial call, found out what team I needed to speak to, and then started phoning them once a week. We got to week 5, and I can't remember her name anymore, which is a shame, but we'll say that she was Sheila. And I would phone up on a Monday morning, 10, 11 o'clock after my first conference call. Sheila, how's it going? What's happening? Have we got me an appointment yet? Come on, help me out. And we used to have a good giggle. You know, I did get an appointment and I went in the end. Because of my tenacity, they actually gave me an appointment a week when they'd cancelled all others. So I actually went in for my initial assessment on the 27th of December, where they'd planned not to have any appointments. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Special treatment. Well done, Sheila.
Yeah, I loved meeting her. It was hilarious. But so yeah, I got that done. I sat with a bloke who chatted to me for about an hour and a half. And he said, yeah, there's definitely something there, Danny. You're not mad. I can see a lot of the autistic traits. I'm not sure on the ADHD, but for me, it seems logical. And I said, well, look, you know, I need to go away from this knowing something. And he said, well, look, I can't say officially until you've had further investigation diagnosis, but there is definitely something there and you are definitely on the right path. And I was like, brilliant. It was just a relief. Just
it
to
is.
know that, yes. Just to sort of know that, well, actually, all these things that have happened over the years where people have thought, oh, that's a bit strange, or I've thought that was a bit strange. There's a reason for it. And that was great.
That's all you need to hear just to make you feel that little bit better about yourself. You're not going mad, or you know, I can understand.
Absolutely. So from that, I was advised, even though I was at a centre that said it was the Autism and ADHD health centre, they didn't offer reviews or diagnosis for the ADHD part. So I got set up for a session to go back in and do the autism review. Did that. The ADHD review, I had to get referred again by the doctor as a separate instance. So they did that for me. And I did the initial assessment for the autism. It was like, yeah, we need to get you a follow-on assessment. And then the ADHD, again, did the initial assessment. We need to get you a follow-on assessment. They advised me that they used a pro forma. So for people like us in technology, it was like a Prince 2 pro forma, a set of standards, ITIL, for argument's sake. Yeah. And what they used for the autism assessment was DISCO. And then what they used for the ADHD assessment was DIVA. So I just giggled, mate. Giggled like a schoolgirl. I was just like, I'm going to be a disco diva.
Yeah, I remember you saying about it. It makes me laugh too.
Yeah. So, but for me, 3/4 of the way into the autism assessment, I took in my old school reports, because when they looked to do this, because I was an older candidate, shall we say, that they look for an understanding and some history from childhood. They're looking for markers of the behaviour.
Ah, right.
So I took in my school reports, because that was the best thing that I got. And while reading one of my reports, there was a comment about, so when I was 11 in technology class, I wanted to build something. We were told, right, this is your project, you've got to build something. And I had it all panned out in my head. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to make a fire engine. I was going to make it out of wood. I was going to have a plastic centre in the middle, and then a little hose coming off that so it could shoot the water out. And the teacher in that year's report put down, Danny is an extremely able student, very capable, but his ideas and the projects that he wants to do are out of scope. I can't remember the specific words anymore, I do apologise, but the lady who was doing my assessment for the autism read that and went, yeah, that's how your head works, because you can see things that for most people will probably be impossible, improbable, but for you it's crystal clear.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was again a bit of an epiphany, a bit of a eureka moment.
Brilliant. Because one of the things that I was interested in is, you know, now that you've got to this point where you're going through the assessment, is when you found that, you know, when you look back over your life and whatever, how has it affected you? Has it done, or has it just been just a validation for you? What's gone on for you?
Just validation. Just those moments when impulsive behaviours were happening, when I was forgetful, when I was starting but couldn't finish, the challenges I took on, the things where I would go for jobs that essentially, you know, when I went for the job that I'm in now, originally, my peers told me that I couldn't do it. My manager said, you can't do it, you're not technical enough. You haven't got enough technical experience background. But I just felt that I could. So I applied. You know, I've got a quote on my LinkedIn page. I was taken on as a development candidate, and I did it. And I think, you know, part of that, possibly the illness and just believing that I could. No, I couldn't now go out and do a race with F1 cars, but, you know, I'd probably get away with a, you know, little Reliant Robin or something on the motorway. So yeah, it opened a door that for most people they wouldn't have even considered knocking. And despite the fact that my peers were telling me and everyone was like, Dan, you can't do it, I was like, well, no, I can. And so I did. So I think that was
a really positive message, isn't it? And we talked about this early on, that, you know, you've got this diagnosis, it's helped you understand yourself better, but it's also who you are and how you've become where you are right now, because you have done things that others haven't, and you've stepped up and you've just developed yourself and achieved them. Thinking the fire engine was a good call, just because it was bigger than you were expecting. So once you got that diagnosis, or one of the questions I wanted to ask that may be something that's going on through their head, I mean, the questionnaires themselves, was that straightforward? And how long afterwards did you get confirmation?
They were an hour to an hour and a half session with one with a qualified nurse, the other one with a psychiatrist, which I'd done in the past. They ran through the questions, took the answers, and yeah, we just went through it. And where I could see opportunities to add additional history or context, I did that as much as I could. I was always prepared for the possibility that they may say, no, you're on the wrong track. You didn't have either of those illnesses. And I'd always resigned myself to the fact that if that had been the outcome, then I would have to go back to the doctor, go back to another psychiatrist and get a totally different assessment without any precursor. You know, when you walk into the doctors and the doctor, you know, says, how are you? What's wrong with you? I've got a cold, doc. So why are you here then? If you know what's wrong with you, why have you come to me?
Yes.
We always go in with preconceptions. And the reality is you've got to go in and get an assessed. You've got to go in and say, I've got a runny nose, my eyes ache, and, you know, my throat hurts. You've got a cold, Mr. Reid. Oh, thanks, Doc. And then you go from there.
Yes.
But because we always try and help ourselves, and I think also the good old Google internet days that we live in now.
Dr. Google. Love
yeah,
it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, no, but I had prepared myself for the possibility that they wouldn't identify with it, they wouldn't find anything. And if that had have been the case, I would have started again from the beginning and said, I get that it's not these things, but I also know that it's definitely not that thing. I need you to help me find what it is.
Yeah.
There is another huge positive that you possibly won't be aware of, Kim, and you're going to get really excited now. So ADHD
Yeah.
is 100% treatable.
Well, I was coming on to that actually.
Oh, okay, you're ahead of me.
What report did you get?
I won't steal your thunder. Come on.
No, it's perfect. It's exactly where we needed to go. So go ahead.
So when I decided to go onto the medication in my early 30s, I decided it was time to actually understand what was depression. So I did some investigation, did a research. Certainly not a neuroscientist, but I learned enough to understand that the depression itself is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. It relates to neurotransmitters and the messages either being blocked or not getting there. And that's just on a cell level. So that's the depression. Great. What's anxiety then? So anxiety is fight or flight, and it's your body producing too much other chemical that you then can't use. You've got no use for.
Yeah.
Okay, so I now understand the two conditions that I'm being told I've got. So where's all this other stuff coming in? So I started investigating ADHD. I started investigating what it actually is and how it works. And it's basically a chemical imbalance in the brain that doesn't support the communication between the neurotransmitters and the the frontal cortex. So for everyone who's sitting there going, that's nice, Dan, what does it mean? It literally is a case of the brain not communicating correctly. And the way that I always try to share this thought, and this is probably, for me, the pinnacle of our time together, Kim, because I've been desperate just to try and say to people, look, I get that I've now got an ADHD and an autism diagnosis. I get that each time something happens during my daily routine or during our time together, when I'm out with my friends, when I'm with my family, I say, oh, that's the autism. I get that that gets you guys down. You're fed up of hearing it. For me, it was an epiphany. So the brain has got the two parts. Everybody knows left brain, right brain, logic, creative. They don't communicate. That's the issue. You've then got the ADHD part where the creative bit just wants to go. It's ready to go 100%. You know, I haven't ate any Skittles today. It's not numbers. It just wants to go. And because they don't communicate, because you haven't got dopamine, because you haven't got the noradrenaline, you can say this one and I can't, I bet, neophrephrine.
It's norepinephrine. Not as good as earlier on.
Yeah. And you know, they've learned that over the years. They've done the brain scans where you wire someone up and you do the relevant tests and challenges, and they can see what part of the brain do or don't react, do or don't do what they need to do. So I think the final part of the message for me is it doesn't mean I'm broke. It does mean I am wired differently. And there are advantages that I think a lot of corporate businesses are now starting to see.
I agree.
And I love that part. For me, my journey, you asked me at the beginning of the last interview, where am I now?
Yes.
I'm loving learning about this. I'm loving sharing information, finding people who are out there who have shared their experiences already and possibly feel that they've fallen on deaf ears and so on. I'm still conscious that when it comes to my next job role, I won't walk in and say, pick me, I'm neurodiverse. you know.
Yeah.
I will go in and get it on my own merits, on my own experience. As and when an occasion comes up, you know, I will share it. And I hope very much so that I'll be able to find an additional role in whatever business I go into to help support their journey for neurodiverse individuals. I know that before I left Vodafone, they had brought in what was called mindfulness first aiders.
Oh, mental health first aiders.
Perfect.
Yes.
So people are latching onto it.
Yeah. I've done the mental health first aid course because I wanted to understand what it was. It's not, I don't deal with the more severe end of the spectrum. I'm obviously the people who have just fallen into it in the last year or two or whatever. Or have got long-standing emotional issues, work with those beautifully. But the more extreme stuff is where they're really covering. I don't recall covering too much about neurodiversity, so I suspect there's an area that they can expand on in that, and maybe that's something worth following up as well, because they don't really talk about that. And yet, you know, as I said to you earlier before this call, is that I am sure, listening to you, that I have had clients come through me who have been in one way or another linked to either ADHD or autism, but they're high functioning, and you know they're getting some benefits from what I do with them, but it won't actually get necessarily to resolving everything for them because there is a diagnosis that's not been picked up. So I have some work to do to make sure that I'm watching for it when I'm seeing clients as well.
So what I would say is on my LinkedIn connections, there is a gentleman who works for IBM.
Yes.
And he shares a huge amount of ADHD neurodiverse information. And I'm still getting my head around who he is and what he does, but he seems to be a champion of it.
Okay, what's his name?
I can't recall.
Okay, not to worry. It's something that you can always add into the bottom of the link when we post
absolutely. I think it's one of those that if you go onto my profile, look at what I've liked, you'll see his name popping up. But yeah, as I say, that's the beginning of my journey, learning about those things and seeing those things.
And I love the fact that you've just said the beginning of your journey, because I think this is just the next phase for you, isn't it? And will take you who knows where, not immediately necessarily, but you'll find it coming out. One of the links you did share with me earlier was a www. For those listening, and I'm going to spell it out. It looks like additudemag.com, ADDITUDEMAG.com, and that's all around ADD. Is that, how similar is that to ADHD? Is there similarities in those? I don't know. Apologies.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So one of the things that we've just said, I'm at the beginning of my journey.
Yes.
So scientists are still working through their journeys. Autism has gone from being ASD to ASC. That hasn't been made publicly aware as yet, because there's always that infamous challenge of, well, is it a disorder? Is it a disease? Is it a condition? How do we label it so that the people who've got it don't feel like lepers, and the people who read up on it and hear about it don't think they are lepers? I'm allowed to say that, by the way. It's kind of like when somebody wears glasses when you were younger. If you wore glasses, you could call somebody else with glasses four-eyed because you had glasses.
Yes.
No offence to them. Yeah? So I can call feeling like a leper because I've been there and I've got that condition. Just thought I'd quantify that in case I get any of the
I think that's, yes, absolutely.
politically correct police running down my door. It's I've lost my flow.
And that's okay. So you gave me...
Try and recover. I'm just going to say I've lost my flow.
That's fine. And you gave me the link of Attitude Mag. Has that been helpful for you? Or because you've sent that to me, and I did start looking at it, and there's a really good YouTube video right at the beginning of that.
That's what I wanted to share.
Okay. I
wanted to try and bring awareness of what that chemical imbalance is and what it means.
Okay.
Because that video I've shared with you, if I recall correctly, is 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's not very long at all, but it was really quite useful in explaining what's going on from a chemical
Yeah.
perspective.
And that's what makes it wonderful. Your question about ADD, I've got my flow back, is ADD is something about autism. So ADHD sits under the umbrella of autism.
Yes.
You've then got lots of other things, and where it gets even more deep. And I think, myself included, that I read some of them and I think, for God's sake, guys, have a break. Because you go into dyspraxia, you go into, well, no brainer, but dyslexia. And there are various strains underneath the autism umbrella that also then sit in the neurodiverse world. And as we said, my journey, I'm becoming more and more aware of the, I think it's dyspraxia, where you bump into things regularly. Your coordination sometimes just isn't what it should or where it should be.
Yeah.
And again, I can relate to times when it's just been too much. I mentioned earlier on about going into the garden to do gardening, or going to the car to do some car work. But whatever task I did, if it was a manual piece of work, I guarantee that I'd end up with a cut or a scratch every time.
Yeah.
And that's actually part of the mental, again, because of the mental part, it impacts the healing of the body. And I've started to notice over the years that that's becoming more and more apparent. It's quite, you can get very deep into it.
Yeah, it sounds like it, definitely. And I think what's going through my head as you're talking is that, and I'm listening, obviously, is that I think we need to have you back in about a year's time to see where you've gone on that journey and to see what else you've learnt and how you've moved forward. Because I think it's really powerful, and I want to say a big thank you to you, Danny, for stepping up and being prepared to be interviewed. It's exactly what I wanted to see people being able to do and feel comfortable to help others, even if they only watch this and then feel better about themselves. That's a win, isn't it? They've watched it and they can start to see actually that they're okay because you're okay. Or they watch this and they
good.
Pardon?
And okay is good, and good is okay.
Yes, exactly. So if you're watching this, viewers, I hope you've found this really interesting. Danny has said a lot more to me than we've covered in these two videos. So we might get some of those in the next one, which we'll do, I think, in about, well, it might even be sooner than a year, depends on how much progress you make, Danny? But I really think it would be worth having you back at some time. So just before I bring this interview to a close, any closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience that may be relevant for them?
For me, I'm conscious that I sometimes ramble and I go off topic. The biggest message that I want to share, the key message for me, is the understanding of the brain communication. Just so that people no longer see ADHD as a label. They actually see ADHD and it resonates with them cognitively and conceptually that, so that person has ADHD or autism, and all it actually means is the parts of their brain and the neurotransmitters in their brain aren't connecting and communicating the way that mine do.
Yeah.
That's the big thing for me. That's the one thing I really want to try and give back.
Yes, thank you very much there. So you're not your label, you've just got this difference with the neurotransmitters working in a different way to other people.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Danny. And thank you for listening to this video. Please do comment below. It's very important to us to hear what your thoughts are around this. Maybe you yourself have been carrying ADHD or autism as a diagnosis, but haven't been able to know where to go with this going forward. I'm hoping Danny's been a bit of an example to you to show that you can do whatever you like. All right then, thank you so much. And yes, once again, Danny, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kim.